Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. Well, the skies here today look about as apocalyptic as the news itself in the aftermath of what happened in Syria on Thursday night at 3:40 a.m. Syrian time. I did a show last night over on YouTube, did the live stream. We looked at the chart for that night as it related to Donald Trump's chart, and it yielded some fairly interesting results. 3:40 in the a.m. was the time of Aquarius rising for what happened in Syria. This is, of course, the New World Order, and the New World Order is fueled by this whole notion of Dark Aquarius, bringing the world together into a hegemonic state where the rule of law is determined by the few, distributed to the many. And this flies in the face of course, what Trump promised as he came into office. He was, in his mind, at least then, with that erratic Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, he was convinced, and he convinced a lot of us, that he was a nationalist, that he was going to put America first. And he was represented by a number of people who, at the very least, were clad in American first sentiments, ideology, whether you like them or not. People like Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn. Jeff Sessions is another, Kellyanne Conway. And all of a sudden, Michael Flynn is gone, Steve Bannon is on the outs, Kellyanne Conway is nowhere to be seen. You see where this is going. Again, I find it really interesting that Nikki Haley and Kellyanne Conway have the same birthday, January 20th. It's really fitting that both women would have the same birthday for a guy that was a Gemini, right? Now, I know they have different positions. I think Kellyanne Conway would be a better ambassador to the UN than Nikki Haley. I was corrected. I've been corrected a couple times, which is not, it happens. I was corrected that Kali is actually very benevolent in that she eats the souls of bad people, kind of like Drew Barrymore's character in the Santa Clarita Diet. She's like a living manifestation of Kali. It doesn't matter. The live people she's eating, they're bad people. So it's a win-win. We get rid of a bad person and she gets fed and stays immortal and gets to run a household as the head zombie mom. I'm afraid that my vision of Kali was tainted a little bit when I hung out with it's out there if you can find it. I did an interview with Bhagavan Das years ago. And if you don't know who Bhagavan Das is, he was a very seminal character in American spirituality. And he lived in India. And his name was Michael Riggs. That was his real name. He lived in India, was hanging out in India before everybody else got there. And he was spending time with Neem Karoli Baba, riding elephants and smoking dope and having a wonderful time. And then Richard Alpert, a.k.a. Ram Dass, showed up. And they became buddies, and they started tripping in Nepal and all these fun places. And he wound up in Richard Alpert's book, a.k.a. Ram Dass, Be Here Now. And he was a bit of a celebrity. And he came back from India, and he toured with George Harrison and all these interesting people. And he wrote a book called I'm Here Now, which is a fantastic book. It is really one of those most naked confessional books I've ever seen or read. It's actually worth pursuing. It gives you an insight into the the 60s in a way that you may not sort of grab. Anyway, I hung out with him for a weekend in, was it 1999? 1999, just turned 1999. It was Super Bowl Sunday that weekend at a place called Harbin Hot Springs, which burned to the ground about a year and a half ago. So he was very into Kali everywhere. And he was, it was just not the best representation of Kali. Let's just put it that way. I'm not going to get into the dirt of the interview. Again, you can find it online if you are so inclined. So my impression of Kali was the Americanized sort of spiritual pop standard. Anyway, we've got to come up with a new nickname for Nikki Haley because Kali's actually a good person, a good entity, eating those nasty souls. So maybe we can have a contest. We've got to come up with a mythical name for Nikki Haley. And whoever wins it, I will send a natal report and a year forecast report. How's that? To come up with a new mythical name for Nikki Haley and what she represents. Anyway, she and Kellyanne Conway both share the same birthday, of course, with Gemini Trump leading the scene. We're looking at the U.S. coming into Syria on the ground by June. Mike Cernovich, who's now being fed intel from the White House. This is how he's getting all this stuff. It's easy to be a journalist, a citizen journalist, if you're being fed material. It doesn't take that much. So he tweeted, June 1st or sooner, boots on the ground. Multiple sources today on Syria. That was 7:45, and that was 2 days ago, p.m. 903 retweets, 855 loves. Well, really, people? There are 855 people out there that love this idea of boots on the ground in Syria. Let me tell you right now, if you're in favor of a strike, not just a strike, but military occupation in Syria, you're in for a war with Iran and Russia. And this is just the way it's going to go. Because Iran and Russia have already said that they're going to retaliate. The next time the U.S. does something, there's going to be a price to pay. So I'm going to read this. This is from RussiaInsider.com. Let's see. U.S. Special Forces already operating in northern Syria, and hundreds of U.S. Marines have been deployed near Raqqa to assist with the assault on ISIS capital. Right. If Cernovich is correct, more boots on the ground would likely mean that Washington will try to enforce safe zones in Syria. Okay, let's break down these safe zones. Trump has repeatedly expressed support for safe zones in Syria. But what is a safe zone? It's just a nice word for partitioning off parts of Syria that will be protected by foreign invaders. So they're going to create safe zones, and they're going to essentially lock Syrians out of their own country. They're going to partition off parts of Syria. So the Guardian, which loves the idea, says here, safety and security is the underlying and critical requirement for the safe zone. I gauge that the regime will now stop dropping barrel bombs and chemical weapons indiscriminately on civilians. Security of the safe zone in this area could be supported by ships in the eastern Mediterranean with radar and missiles. So they're talking about sea support for the safe zones. Cross the safe zone, coming after you. This would negate the need for coalition aircraft to fly in Syrian and Russian airspace, which is guarded by anti-aircraft assets. Security on the ground must be policed by UN monitors and troops who proved effective in Aleppo after the evacuation. Not while it was going on. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has already suggested that British troops could lead this role. What is the purpose of Brexit? If you are leading the role of troops in a safe zone, aren't you just doing the bidding of NATO and all these other EU countries that somehow have some kind of vested interest in popping Assad out of there. So the safe zones and the white helmets and all these other very wonderful sounding pieces of covert aggression are really nothing more than Orwellian speak. Safe zones mean occupy. White hats mean really bad guys masquerading as good guys. It's 9/11. That's what's happening. Again, this is the inversion of truth. Oh, safe zones. Look, here's the deal. And I know this is going to fall on deaf ears where it really needs to be heard. If you're a soldier, a man or a woman, you've got to say no to fighting on the ground in Syria. You have to say no. And Trump has been just lavish with his praise of the military. Oh, he loves the military. I love our fighting men and women. And all the money that's being spent in the Pentagon to buy new missiles for the ones that they blew up. And a lot more from the top down. There's going to be a lot of pressure for American men and women to go to Syria and fight, even if it's under the auspices of some kind of safe zone, which is, again, this Orwellian doublespeak. But if we have any chance, we have to stop. We have to resist. We have to say no. This is not our war. It's not our war. And the gas attacks were complete and utter bullshit. And at the end of the day now, we know who ordered the gas attacks, or the retaliation of the gas attacks. It was Ivanka and Jared Kushner, who, by the way, now are the President and the First Lady of the United States. If you haven't figured that out yet, you better get hip to that trip. Jared Kushner is really the de facto President of the United States. And Ivanka Trump is the First Lady. Because we know Melania is not in the White House. She is in absentia, or he is in absentia, if you buy the myth that Ivania, or Melania, Vanya, Stefania, if you buy the myth that Melania is actually a man, maybe not a she. So, but that wouldn't be too off for the White House now, would it? I don't know. There's a lot of digging around on the internet about Donald Trump's genealogical origins, and some of them are very strange. For instance, I believe his mother's mother, I think 3 generations back, if I'm not mistaken, she's married to a guy named McLeod, and her maiden name is McLeod. And a lot of the internet gene scrubbers, or genies, are trying to understand how a woman could have a maiden name and the name of, it's very unusual, of the man she's married to. So there's this prevailing thought that she wasn't Scottish after all. And in fact, Trump's genealogical history is a complete whitewash. And then his roots are not where he claims them to be, but actually come from another part of Europe, which makes him not Scottish and not German, but of the same geographical location of many members of his cabinet. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing or a good thing or a right thing or a wrong thing. There's just a lot of information, a lot of digging down into the internet to understand what his roots are. And if that's the case, then what we're seeing here is an evolution of a president who has said that he wants to put America first, when in actuality America is at least second or maybe even third on the list at this point in time. And the one who's making America second and third on the list is probably President Jared Kushner and First Lady Ivanka. Because, of course, they were the ones that were the most vocal when it came to getting Trump's ear and striking Syria. So keep that in mind. Now, we're looking at roughly the end of May. We talked about this on last night's show over on YouTube. This is when Mars goes into Gemini. And if you missed last night's live stream, let me give you the dates here. So we're looking at when the Sun, which it would be Mars, in Gemini, is in conjunction with Trump's Sun. Trump is at 22 degrees, or 22 degree Gemini, and his true node is at, 15? And then, no, his true node is at 20, that's right. And then Uranus is at 17. So they're all bunched up, right? Well, here we go. Mars is going to be in Gemini at 22 degrees right on the 24th. 24th with the moon in Taurus. Now that moon in Taurus is about as dark as it gets until we get to the new moon, which happens on the 26th. That's a Friday. So circle Friday the 26th on your calendar. And I'll tell you why. Number one, it is a news cycle that generally where things go down on Friday. You have the weekend and people are having events and activities and they've already signed, their kids up to do dance camp or, whatever it is they're doing. So they're not going to spend a lot of time digesting media, unless, of course, they're me and, or other people that are invested in this. So Friday is the classic day to initiate, always. We're also talking about a new moon, so we're talking the dark of the sky. Now, this would be kind of a strike, but I don't think the U.S. is going to strike anymore. I think they're going to go in and they're going to try to slither through the side or the back door and try to get into these safe zones. But something fairly, how do we say this? Ostentatious enough for it to get our attention is going to go down on the 26th under the new moon in Gemini and under Mars in Gemini at 22 degrees conjunct Trump's Sun in Gemini. It will cross Trump's Uranus a little bit earlier. That would be on the 17th, and that's the radical moon in Aquarius. And of course, Mercury will be direct on the 17th. It stations on the 16th. So on the 17th, it goes to 0 Taurus. And Venus, of course, will have been direct for a while. Saturn, going retrograde, will be at 26 degrees right around that time. So it's all lining up here for the last 2 weeks in May, astrologically, to see what's going to go down with the country and Syria and the mess that's going on over there. It's a total mess, and it's all based on a mountain of bullshit and lies. And a lot of this was sold to us by George Clooney and his white hat, his fake white hats, which are really Al-Qaeda with just white helmets. He won an Oscar for it. I tell you, if you ever see George Clooney in public, you got to let this guy have it. Okay, so what else do we have going on here? There's a thing I read about Rex Tillerson. Let me see if I can find this. You might find it interesting. See if I can get there. The original source of the tweet. All right, here we go. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Okay. This is from RT. Tillerson might actually have a brain of his own. Unless this, of course, is just another, strange tactic that the Trump administration is employing with their 4D chess. It says here, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said the Syrian crisis can only be solved through a political process. Well, first of all, it's not a crisis. The crisis is what you've created. They're just a country living their lives, trying to get by in a world that wants to oust their leader, take over a major oil and gas pipeline, install a puppet government with a dictator from a neighboring country, bomb the shit out of the place so that Rand Corporation and all these other major U.S. corporations can come back in and build it up, at the cost of U.S. taxpayers, and then run up a bunch of debt so that they can then go into massive debt with the World Bank and the IMF and sign their resources over perpetuity. You see, that's the crisis. There's no crisis in Syria. The Syrian crisis is what the Syrian people are experiencing. That's the crisis. Let's get that straight. Now, here's what Tillerson says. Our strategy in Syria, our priority is first to defeat ISIS, the U.S. official said in an interview with ABC's This Week host George Stephanopoulos, which was aired Sunday, saying that once the battle with the terrorist group is concluded, which according to the U.S. official is going quite well, it was going really, really well until you stepped in and started firing missiles. Washington plans to turn its attention to achieving ceasefire agreements between the regime and opposition forces. Bringing the parties to the table for political discussions clearly requires the participation of the regime and the support of their allies, Tillerson said in another Sunday interview to the American media, speaking to John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation. Once a ceasefire becomes a reality in Syria, we will have the conditions to begin a useful political process, which basically means, okay, we're going to move Assad out of here. That's what it really means. It is through the political process that we believe the Syrian people will ultimately be able to decide the fate of Bashar Assad, he told ABC. Now, what they'll probably want to do is they'll probably want to run bogus elections, have their bogus candidates that they set up, and rig everything so Assad is defeated, and once he's defeated, basically run him out of the country and try him for war crimes. Tillerson reiterated in the same on CBS, saying that Washington hoped to work with its coalition members and with the UN, in particular through the Geneva process, to be able to navigate a political outcome in which the Syrian people will, in fact, determine Bashar Assad's fate and his legitimacy. The U.S. Secretary of State underlined the Russian role in the process, saying that the U.S. hoped it could work together with Russia and use their influence, and that Moscow will choose to play a constructive role in supporting ceasefire through their own Astana talks, but also through Geneva. It's a bunch of crap. It is a bunch of crap. This is just their way of saying, hey, what we want to do is we want to make enough of a show of force so that Assad realizes that there's no other option, that we've closed all the exits, that we have neutralized the Russians, and so now we have to sit down and talk. Because this is contrary to what Nikki Haley has been saying, which is there is going to be regime change in Syria. She's pounding her fist. There's going to be regime change in Syria. How'd you like to be married to a woman like that? Man. I'm so proud of her. That's my girl. You go get him, Nick. Yeah. So that's the state of the world today. We've got a lot more going on. Oh, plenty. There's plenty more that we can talk about. We're just trying to wrap up here with what happened with Syria, bring in some astrological elements, give you some dates to look at in the final week of, or the final 2 weeks of May, which it really seems like that's when everything just completely ratchets up. And there is the astro confluence of events, especially with Mars. Mars is the planet of war. And on Trump's sun and Uranus and his true note, it is like really unstable. Super volatile, super unstable. You think it's unstable now? Just wait till Mars hits. Just wait. And then, of course, we're going to have Mars coming in and hitting his Cancerian planets after that. Mars on Venus, Mars on Saturn, Mars on Mercury. I think during that time, when Mars goes into Cancer, it's going to that's going to be a huge, huge backlash for him. Unless he flips his script again, which he's been known to do, and goes in the other direction, which I don't think he'll do because Ivanka and Jared are running the show right now. It will be the major backlash when Mars hits those Cancer planets. His base will completely turn on him. They've only partially turned on him now, about 75% maybe. There was something I wanted to read here before we got out of here. Okay. This is from The Hill. Get ready because there's more censorship on hate speech laws are coming in this country, by the way. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what happens because we do have a thing called the Constitution. But hate speech laws, and they're working overtime now. The ADL, the SPLC, the JFNA, they're all working real hard because they want to pass hate speech laws, so that there can be no discourse, there can be no rational discourse about certain countries' involvements in world politics. That the pipeline for free speech will be completely closed off, and it will be an ideological cul-de-sac. Because people are waking up. Waking up. That's right. They are. So when this happens, here's the wake up bell. That's right. Time to wake up, people. Because when people wake up, more measures of control are put upon them. Plain and simple. It has nothing to do with hate. It has nothing to do with persecution. It has nothing to do with violence. It has everything to do with awareness. And it's across the board. It's across the board. It could be genetically modified organisms. It could be the weather. It could be geoengineering the weather. It could be transhumanism. It could be the trans agenda being implemented into our genes. By the way, I had an intuitive hit that the reason why we're experiencing more and more transgender and gender dysmorphia is because of genetically modified organisms inside the human genome, along with vaccines and the rate of vaccines, the schedule. So you put the two together, and what do you have? You've got people that are mutating. That's it. We're seeing a mutation of the species. And this is so nascent, so new that we can't even wrap our heads around it. There's really nothing else in history that can even relate to what it is that our young people are going through, because they have been genetically modified through the foods they eat, the foods that their mother and their parents have eaten. Just think about that. I mean, that in and of itself is passed along through the genealogy, as well as the effects of vaccines that the parents carry. It would take probably at least 3 generations for vaccines to be completely, let's say your kids did not have any vaccines, and their kids didn't have any vaccines, and their kids didn't have any vaccines. It probably take about 3 generations for all the sort of junk vaccine DNA swimming around our genome to be essentially neutralized and be completely irrelevant. That's what it would take. Speak out against this stuff. That's going to be the next line. Oh, you hate these children, these young people with autism and Asperger's. You hate them. How can you speak out against them? Oh, look at you. You're full of bigotry for these poor young people who are having a difficult time understanding who they are. No, we're talking about conditions that chemically, biologically, and genetically might be leading to some form of mutation in our species. We don't know. This is all new territory for us. The other night I was watching a show on Netflix. It was about strange things. And my son had his first visceral introduction to transgenics. And I mean visceral. And on this show, they detailed how there's this spider that spins an incredible web, high tensile cilia coming out of its butt, right? And the webs are just so taut and strong, these webs. And these people are looking at the webs going, man, if we could just somehow figure out how to get more web out of their ass, we could make a lot of money. And they thought about it. Said, well, spiders, they don't like living amongst other spiders. They'll eat each other until there's enough space where only a few spiders exist. It's the strong will survive, and they get to have their web space. They're not spiders. They're not herd insects. They're not like ants. You can get a bunch of ants together, and boy, they love being together. Those ants. Spiders not like that. So they thought to themselves, how can we get the benefit of this spider cilia at kind of a much bigger level? Well, what does and can live together? Ooh, how about goats? Yeah, how about goats? Well, what if we introduced the spider gene to a goat? And that's exactly what they did. They introduced a spider gene to a goat. And these goats have no idea. They got a little spider in them now. But when they have their milk collected, they figured out a process to reduce their milk to a pulpy mass. And in that pulpy mass is the essence of the spider filament. And they're able to extract it in large quantities. A football field's worth of this spider filament. Blew my kid's head right out of the water. Boom! He kept telling me, that's weird. That's weird. The spider goat, it's weird. Who knows what's going to happen 3 or 4 generations down the line? They don't know. Maybe they're there already. Maybe it'll take 10. And the next thing you know, the spider goat will have, 4 eyes on each side of its head. Speak out against that, though. How could you say that? How can you say that about that poor goat? Don't you know those goats have feelings too? Hey, it's a Libra moon, though. I couldn't sleep at all last night. It must be the onset of the full moon. There's a lot floating around out there and in there. But it's a Libra full moon. Make the most of it. Be gentle, be kind, be diplomatic. Be good to yourself, be good to other people. Open some doors today, even if the person you open the door for is scowling. It's okay. Maybe they'll say thank you. For the next 48 hours, let's indulge in some diplomacy and some harmony and some peace. Let's say a prayer for the Archon-infested leaders of the free world. And let's say a prayer for the people who are not the Archon-infested leaders of the free world, so that we can continue our awakening process and begin to become more self-determined than ever before. And with that, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay with what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. This has been 15 Minutes of Flame.